This
I
conference will now
am
be
going to be
recorded.
recording this, so please keep your swear words to a minimum if you can. So just to start, I want to talk a little bit about the transition between, well, now the thing is not letting me move the slide forward. I mean, this is just, oh, here we go. Okay, so just to give you kind of a comparison between practicum and internship, remember practicum, you're completing either 600 or 800 hours, and that's going to actually be before you begin internship. Remember, practicum is a requirement of the school, and it has nothing to do with the Board of Psychology licensure. Internship, on the other hand, fulfills two roles. The first 1,500 hours is a requirement of the Chicago school, and it must be completed in order to graduate. But also, it's the first half of the 3,000 hours that the Board of Psychology requires. The second 1,500 hours is actually attained in your postdoc, but the first 1,500 hours is going to satisfy both the school and the first half of the Board of Psychology requirement. Secondly, the board will ask you to complete the EPPP and also an exam called the CPLEE, which is a state exam, but you don't actually have to worry about either one of those until you actually start your internship hours. The main document that you're going to take a look at when trying to find whether or not a site is specific for you is this third bullet point down called Supervision at a Glance. It's actually available on the Board of Psychology website. The Supervision at a Glance document is important because the main aspect that you need to keep in mind for an internship is that you need to be supervised by a licensed psychologist. There's little stipulations that you can actually be supervised by a psychiatrist, for example, but there are stipulations involved with that. So the Supervision at a Glance document you should be absolutely familiar with, and this will make more sense when we talk about psych-assistantship positions versus KPIC positions. So that document, Supervision at a Glance, is provided by the Board of Psychology. It's something that you'll actually take a look at just to make sure everything is straight. Lastly, the predoctoral internship sites must be approved by the school, and this is just kind of for your own safety. We want to make sure that although that the agreement is between you, the board, and your supervisor, we want to try to help you through the process to make sure that what it is that you're doing is actually going to count for the hours. But ultimately, you're going to be responsible for those things. So I'm going to talk to you about three different options today. First one I'm going to talk to you about is the KPIC option. So the KPIC option is the California Psychology Internship Council. Their website is www.kpic.net. And this is actually one of the routes that the majority of the individuals in the applied clinical program will use, and that's because our program is not APA accredited. Part B of option one, we're going to briefly touch on APIC, but APIC is not an option for a lot of individuals in our program because we are not APA accredited. They only let us participate in the clearinghouse, which I'll go into more detail moving forward. The second option I'm going to talk about is the psychological assistant route, and there's going to be a good majority of individuals will pick this route, but there's a lot of differences that you need to keep in mind when working as a psychological assistant. Most specifically and most importantly is that pre-approval from the Board of Psychology is required in order to be a psychological assistant. The third option is actually when you work in an exempt setting, and I'd say 1% or less of the individuals in our program actually qualify to work in an exempt setting. But if you work at a state, county, or city agencies, sometimes some of the pre-approvals are not necessary, but we can talk more about this. And to be honest, it's better to get pre-approval just for the safety's sake rather than actually moving forward, doing your 3,000 hours and recognizing that they don't count. As we talked about a little bit already, the state requirements are what you're working towards in conjunction with the school requirements. All these are governed by the California Board of Psychology. We talked already about the 3,000 hours that you need to complete. That's pre-doc and post-doc hours, and then the two exams we also talked about. California are very strict about their guidelines. So if you say to them, nobody told me or I misunderstood, they're not going to let you bend the rules. They do not make any exceptions to any of the rules. So I'm really pleading with you to become more familiar with the Board of Psychology. You can get on the website early enough. I actually listed the link for you. There's students, frequently asked questions. There's a whole list of instructions. The supervision at a glance is there. So all the material is there, but it really takes a lot of self-study to understand. Just simply listening to this presentation today will give you a good introduction, but to actually get a hold of all the information that you're going to need, you really need to spend some time going over things like this. To be an eligible candidate for internship, you have to meet pretty standard requirements moving forward. So you want to make sure your GPA is appropriate. You want to make sure you've taken all the appropriate classes. You want to make sure there's no outstanding requirements or incompletes. But most importantly, and the thing to take away from this slide is that in order to apply for a KPIC internship, your dissertation proposal needs to be approved. This is not the case with a psych assistantship, but with a KPIC site, the dissertation proposal needs to be approved. You actually have until the start of the actual internship for the dates that you're. So at this point, you want to reach out to your chair and make sure that you are on track. If you stayed within the guidelines that the Chicago School provided for you as far as dissertation classes, you actually should be on track to actually meet that proposal approval stage. And this is not proposal approval from the IRB, it's your chair's approval. So it's a little less stressful as far as that goes. Okay, so here's the first step, and we'll talk about KPIC. The Chicago School as a whole actually strongly encourages participation in this program for a couple of different reasons. APIC, which I'll talk about in a minute, is actually much more competitive than KPIC is, because KPIC is California based only. So every site on KPIC is in California. Obviously, California is a large state, but it's better than going against every other state in the country. Secondly, there's a lot of concerns that arise with a psych assistant placement. We'll go over this a little bit more in detail, but for example, KPIC already has gained approval from the Board of Psychology, meaning they've already submitted documentation that says that the students are going to get appropriate hours, that the students are going to get appropriate supervision, and the pay structure has already been arranged. With a psych assistant position, none of those are guaranteed. So, for example, if you are in your KPIC internship and the site suddenly loses funding, KPIC will do everything they can to make sure that you get placed into another site. Or if the supervisor leaves or gets pregnant or whatever the case may be, KPIC will actually support you. A psych assistantship position does not have those type of guarantees. So you want to really make sure you know what you're getting into when you're choosing a psych assistant. Next, the KPIC site's an advantage for individuals in the applied clinical program because it recognizes that we as a program only have to complete 1 year of practicum. In APIC internship sites, you'll actually be competing against individuals who have completed 2 full practicums. So you have about half the hours, which is what sites essentially look at to see how much experience you've had. Additionally, KPIC has many programs associated with its membership. And a lot of these are well-established and well-known training programs. So a lot of these sites that are on KPIC are already well-known, as compared to a psych assistantship position, which is usually done at a private practice. There's not a lot of support garnished with a psych assistant position that you'd get with an KPIC position like we already talked about. Additionally, there's a lot of questions about the APA accreditation, both with the school and both with organizations. So with the school, obviously, we are never going to be an APA accredited program, just simply because we're a postmaster's program. But that doesn't necessarily mean you cannot seek out an APA accredited internship. If you know that you want to work with a jail agency or the federal government, it's probably in your best interest to seek out an APA accredited internship. But for the individuals that I've worked with, and even myself, the fact that the APA accredited or not accredited internship really makes very little difference. Okay, so just getting into a little bit more detail about CAPIC, it's actually open to all states, but only sites from CAPIC are in California. CAPIC sites are a little bit less competitive than APIC sites, but they include both paid and unpaid sites. So you want to make sure that you're looking closely at what the salary requirements are going to be for CAPIC. APIC requires that there is payment. CAPIC allows 0 salaried positions. The good news for APIC and CAPIC is, like I said before, both have been pre-approved by the California Board of Psychology. And if you get an APIC site or a CAPIC site, you can be 99% confident that you're going to meet the requirements for licensure within the context of when your training site will meet. In other words, over the year that you're going to be there. On your handouts, I gave you the form that looks like this, and it lists the important dates for CAPIC, but there's a couple of ones specifically that I want you to keep in mind. October 15th, 2009 is when the student registration opens. So just a few days ago, this opened. And then this allows you to actually start to register for the CAPIC match. A couple of other dates to keep in mind. February 15th, 2019, CAPIC is going to be presenting at the LA campus and actually hold their internship fair there. So even if you don't know where you're going to be at, plan on attending this just for a little bit more experience in meeting with individuals or learning about different programs. And of course, if you're interested in the Northern California area, that fair is on February 8th, but they actually haven't found a location for that yet. The next important date for CAPIC, and one that you should highlight on your form, is the March 5th, 2019 date. You have to have all the application materials turned in order to participate. Now, this is the part where I'm talking about where these deadlines are absolute, because if you don't meet your requirements to get by March 5th, CAPIC is not going to let you participate in that match, and then you have to wait all the way till April 8th in order to participate in what they call the clearinghouse, which essentially is another word for sites that are left over. The CAPIC application process is actually pretty straightforward, but it does require a couple of different steps. So the first step is when the school sends an email to an organization called Internship Fit. Internship Fit is a subsidiary of CAPIC, and they basically want to make sure that we are sending students only from our program. So once I send the email to Internship Fit, you actually get an email from them and say you have been successfully registered, and then it's your turn to fill in the documentation. The documentation will be standard things like your CV, your cover letter, but most importantly, your letters of recommendation. And this is where a lot of students have trouble meeting that March 5th date because their letters have not come in time. So once you turn all that documentation in, the third step is actually another approval from the school. And they're essentially completing the CERF form, the CERF form on CAPIC. So once you follow that two-step process, you're actually ready to apply for CAPIC sites. Now, if you look back on the important dates for CAPIC or the match, you'll notice there's an application deadline by March 5th, but the next day is when actually the ranking you're allowed to do. The applications is when you're allowed to start those. So this is when you start to apply for the sites that you're interested in and then go on your interviews. And then you'll notice on April 2nd, it says the match ranking deadline. So over that month or month and a half, you'll be contacting sites, going on interviews, and determining what sites you'd like to rank. When April 2nd comes around, you will rank your sites on a scale of 1 to however many interviews you actually went on. And remember, the matches for KPIC, just like practicum, are binding. So if you agree to go to a site and you're matched to that site, that's actually a binding contract that you have to follow through on. We can talk with more detail about this process, and I also encourage you to talk with your practicum instructors about this. But essentially, you don't want to rank a site that you wouldn't settle for. There'll probably be one or two choices you have, and then you might be teetering back and forth about that third one. And my advice would be not to put that on your list unless you're certain that if you do by chance get matched there, that you'll attend. Monday, April 8th is the match notification day, and that's when KPIC reaches out and says you've been successfully matched. If you haven't been matched, that's when the clearinghouse opens. The clearinghouse opens is a little bit of a free-for-all because sites that have not been matched with students and students that have not been matched with sites are basically trying to arrange meetings so that they can introduce themselves, they can possibly go on more interviews, and then they can be placed as a matter of that day. But it's really the catch-up point. The application is actually pretty straightforward, but it does require a little forethought, specifically the autobiographical statement and the theoretical orientation essay. These should be written by yourself, obviously, because these sites want to know a little bit about what you might bring to the organization. What you want to do is actually, obviously, you want to fit for what the site is requiring, so do as much research you can on the site, but you also want to bring a personal touch to these essays. I also mentioned the aspect of the 5 references, and some sites do require transcripts, but you want to pay attention to the specific requirements from the site. KPIC does not require them, though, initially. Okay. We talked a little bit about the intern fit registration. And remember, the important aspect for KPIC is the dissertation proposal needs to be approved. And then I complete the SURF form as we go through that. And then just final bullet point there is if there's additional site-specific application materials requested by the site, it's actually your responsibility to send them those materials. An example of this is if it's a heavy testing site, the site might want you to send some sample reports that you've completed either in your practicum or your practicum classes. So you want to make sure you're attaching those documents to the application. A question did come up on the message board asking about the handouts. So the handouts are actually within this PowerPoint. It's that KPIC match form that I already showed you here. And then the last one is the final slide, or the second to last slide in the 10 questions that are listed in the second to last slide. Okay, so this is just another review of the match process so that we have a better understanding, but really keep note of these application deadlines. In fact, set yourself a reminder in your phone right now about what it is you have to make sure you're turning in, because it happens every year. I have a student call me in a panic that says, you know, it's March 6th. I just finally got my application materials completed. Can you call KPIC and ask for an extension? And the answer is no, they will not give you any sort of extension. So just make sure that that's done. So when you're selecting sites, you really want to keep in mind the same process that you went through in practicum. What type of training experience do you want that's going to get you on the path that you need? If you are dead set or dead on being an assessment psychologist and you haven't had any practicum assessment, you need to get assessment during your internship, or you're just going to have a hard time securing a job in the future if you don't have any experience in those areas. You could begin the search for the different sites at kpic.net. Also keep in mind the site's competitiveness. The sites that are highly paid are obviously very competitive, but you also want to keep in mind on how many sites or how many students they're actually interviewing and how many students they're accepting. There's a site in Northern California, NASA, that has a $56,000 stipend that, of course, everybody would like. However, they only accept one student. So you have to take into consideration the likelihood of you actually being able to do that. Additionally, you want to consider the site's requirements for the application. It's not imperative that you have experience in everything they want, but if it's a child assessment site and you've never done assessments, you've never worked with children, you have to kind of consider what the likelihood of you getting a site like that might be. I encourage you to talk to your practicum instructor and also your advisor on what they did as clinical psychologists, and just try to get a better idea about what makes sense for you. Okay, so the second option we're going to talk about is the psychological assistant option. Now, a psychological assistant is usually a licensed clinical psychologist in a private practice. So the licensed clinical psychologist in a private practice, you come to an agreement with them and say, yes, I would like to work at your organization under your license. Now, the important aspect to keep in mind for psych assistant options is the steps need to be followed. First, you need to locate a site and a supervisor that's actually going to qualify. Remember, you're going to keep in mind supervision at a glance document to make sure that the psychologist qualifies. The psychologist doesn't simply need to be a PsyD or a PhD or an MD. They need to be licensed as a psychologist by California. Once you meet these individuals and you realize that they do meet the requirements, you come to agreement with them on a host of different aspects. What rate they're going to pay you, how clients are going to come to you, what the supervision outlook is going to look. And the thing to keep in mind is a lot of supervisors are happy to take you on as a psych assistant, but then say to you, well, I'll give you a 60-40 fee split, meaning I'm going to keep 40% and the student keeps 60%. However, the student needs to come up with the clients themselves. That's a daunting task for individuals to be a marketing individual and a psychologist in training. So you want to make sure that you are working within an organization that probably already has a waiting list or already has individuals walking through the door. So the step two, once you've reached both the aspect of who you're going to work with and whether or not you can come to the agreement, is to check with the Board of Psychology to make sure that they're going to meet the requirements. And then step three, you fill out the psychological assistant paperwork on the Board of Psychology website. It's recommended that you do this 1 to 3 months ahead of time, because the Board of Psychology sometimes has a hard time getting back to you, and sometimes they get just backlogged with applications. So the earlier you can do that, the better. Don't worry about doing it too early, because the renewal is quite simple. All you have to do is send in the forms again, and you can renew for another year. The link is listed there to take you right to the psychological assistant aspect for the Board of Psychology, and there is a detailed instructions listed there for you. So at this point, you're probably thinking, I don't know what's best for me. Do I choose psych assistant or do I choose KPIC? At this point, the good news is you can do both at the same time and then see what kind of works out for you moving forward. There's a couple of different things to keep in mind, and this list is not exclusive by any means, but for example, KPIC, you don't have to go through the struggle about getting pre-approval from the board because you've already been pre-approved for something like this. However, keep in mind, KPIC may have unpaid sites, whereas a psychological assistant position, you probably are going to get paid. But again, you might have to find your own clients even getting paid. So there's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of pros and cons for both options. So we're starting this process early. You're actually not going to actually be starting your internship until about summer at the earliest. Usually September is usually a typical start date. But you can actually start the internship at any point in the year, and you actually will take internship classes online that coincide with the class that are offered each semester. So if you miss a particular deadline, don't worry, because you can technically get placed at any point in the year for internship. Briefly, I want to talk to you about APIC, just in case individuals are choosing this route. If you're somebody that knows that they want to find an out-of-state internship because either you're from a different state or you already know that you want to be licensed in a different state, APIC might be the route for you, because there are countrywide sites available through these individuals. However, the APIC application process is a lot more difficult and a lot more expensive than the KPIC process. You do the same initial application materials, cover letters, CVs, letter of recommendations, example, but they also require you to do 4 essay questions. And these are pretty in-depth, detailed essays that you need to write. So this is something that you actually have to get started on rather quickly. Again, the letters of recommendation need to be turned in ahead of time, and that you want to make sure that everything is done before the application dates. Application dates for APIC come up very quickly. So you want to make sure, if this is an option for you, that you either reach out to me or reach out to your practicum instructors or your advisors, or just hop on the APIC website and start doing your own research. You'll have to kind of get through this. The other advantage, and what I recommend whether you're going to do APIC or not, is you subscribe to this listserv called Subscribe Match News. This is a resource for students, and what it is, you put your email address in, you sign up, and then you either sign up for daily or digest notifications from all different students that have signed up. The advantage for this is that you see emails from students that are behind the process and ahead of the process with you, so you start to anticipate what questions you're going to need to ask for yourself. Also, this is where all the job postings are listed. So if you're looking for an APIC position specifically, this is where specifically in the clearinghouse aspect, you can do this. There's no cost to do this. It's available for all students, and if you use your Chicago school email address, it's actually approved pretty quickly. Okay, so just a couple of things that I need to remind you so that you can just kind of understand the whole aspect of the process. Is we're going to help you as much as we can through this, but as you see, or should see by now already, that this is a very detailed situation, and it's really going to come down to the ownership you take of it. We're going to try to help you meet the deadlines and keep the reminders, but if you miss something, there's not a lot that we can do. I really encourage you to set time aside to make sure that you're completing the appropriate required materials, specifically those letters of recommendation, because without fail, students call in a panic. They've got 2 of the 3 letters. What do? And really, they do not, APIC or KPIC do not give a lot of flexibility, actually 0 flexibility, about missing deadlines. Lastly, and it's sad that we have to say this, but prepare ahead of time for your interviews. Practice doing sample interview questions. Encourage your practicum instructors or your advisor to even set aside some time to do some role play, because the questions that they asked in internship interviews, although are often common, sometimes they throw wrinkles in, and sometimes the questions are quite hard to answer. Additionally, dress professionally for these interviews. We had actually a student last year or 2 years ago, went to an internship interview in their pajamas and wondered why they weren't offered a second interview. So you want to make sure that simple things like that are being taken into consideration. Additionally, you want to make sure to remember that you have an ongoing relationship with these organizations. So stay positive, and even though if you don't place with them, that doesn't mean you won't place with them for postdoc or actually somehow work with them in the future. So you want to make sure you're developing these relationships. More jobs have come across my desk because of the people that I know rather than the information that I know. You want to make sure that you're starting to arrange these relationships professionally with the students around you, but also the clinicians that you could be working with. If you know right now that the psych assistant route is probably for you, now's the time to start meeting individuals and learning about what they do, so that you could develop the relationship over the next couple months and ask them, would they be willing to be a supervisor in that type of situation. Okay, at this point, we're going to go over a couple of the internship frequently asked question quiz for individuals. So if you know the answer, go ahead and shout it out. So how many hours do I need to complete for internship in the applied clinical program?
15.
Correct. The answer is 1,500. But remember, that's the first half of the 3,000 that you need. Question 2, what internship option requires pre-approval from the Board of Psychology? Good. Psych assistantship is the internship option that requires pre-approval. Remember to start this process 1 to 3 months ahead of time before you're doing that. Okay, question 3. What stage does my dissertation need to be in order to apply for a KPIC internship?
Chair.
All right, so your dissertation proposal needs to be approved. Remember, it needs to be approved by your chair. It doesn't need to be approved by the IRB. Next question. What document should you reference when you are determining the appropriate supervisor?
Supervisor at a glance or something?
Correct. Supervision at a glance document. Nice. Yeah, Dr. S, you're winning this for sure. What day do you need to have everything completed and turned into APIC in order to qualify for the match?
March 5th.
March 5th. Good. Here's a question that we haven't gone over yet, but it's a talking point. Can you complete a half-time KPIC and a half-time psychological assistantship at the same time?
Yes.
The answer is yes. You can do a half-time KPIC and a half-time psych assistant. You can also do a half-time psychological assistant and another half-time psychological assistant. The only thing you cannot do is 2 half-time KPIC internships at the same time. KPIC will not agree to that, and they do not allow that. Okay, here's another question. So is the paperwork for the same as internship as it was for practicum?
No.
No. Obviously, I put this question there for a reason. The paperwork for practicum is all electronic. So you need to log in as a supervisor. You need to go in and sign documents electronically. Internship, we make it a lot easier for you. You simply print out the forms that we're going to ask you to turn in. You fill them in by hand. You ask your supervisor to fill them in, and then you upload the document with a scanner to your ALCIA page. Okay, next question. It's the school's responsibility to make sure that all overall requirements are filled for the psychological assistant position.
No.
No, it's not the school's responsibility. And this is not because we're trying to be difficult, but remember, the psychological assistant agreement is between you, the student, the supervisor who is going to provide your signatures and supervision, and the Board of Psychology. The school really does not have the option to get involved because they are not asked for anything along the way. There's one exception to this, and this is how you apply as a psych assistant, because you can apply 2 different ways as a psych assistant. You can either use your master's degree, and if your master's degree has the word psychology, you're 99% sure going to be able to qualify for that. And then the second option is that you apply as an advancement to candidacy applicant. So if you have your master's degree in social work or in counseling or something like that, and it may not qualify as initial for the Board of Psychology, the advancement to candidacy option you will qualify for that because you are a doctoral student working towards your doctorate degree.
Well, we have a question.
Yeah, let me finish these last 2 and then we'll get to any questions that you have. No problem. Next question. Can I start my internship at any point in the year? Yes, you can start your internship at any point in the year. And this directly goes into the next question. What classes do I need to take in conjunction with my internship?
Internship 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
Internship 1, 2, and 3 is a good guess for those of you that didn't know the answer, because that's right. But remember, the internship classes need to be taken in conjunction with your internship. And this is why they're offered each and every semester. So you stay the course because internship 1, for example, has the initial paperwork due. Internship 2 has the midterm evaluation due. And internship 3 has the final evaluation and hours logs due. So you want to make sure you're coordinating the start of your internship with the classes so that you can work through those. Okay, so let's open this up to some questions.
Let me go first. As interns, do you register for a number to track our hours?
Anybody get that?
He wants to know how you track your hours.
Okay, so you track your hours the same way that you'd actually track for practicum. You don't have to turn your internship hours in unless the board asks you for them. So I would actually suggest the easiest way I found is to sign up for one of the electronic record keeping that you might use. You could also keep them by hand if you want. The records that you keep, you should probably keep at least monthly, if not weekly. and this is for your own protection. A lot of times things happen with supervisors. You either get in an argument with them or, they become ill and they lose it. But if you've got your documentation written off, they cannot say that you didn't complete those hours. So
Yeah.
the more you can keep that, the better.
Dr. Gibbons, I should be clear. Since we're interns, I guess I meant to ask, do we register for an internship number with the board, or?
So the internship number you're talking about registering for is actually the psych assistant application. You don't have to register if you're joining KPIC, but you do have to register if you're a psych assistant. Question. Hold on 1 second. We got an in-class question.
For the recommendation letters, I was wondering how far back or how close do they need to be?
Okay, so the question is how recent do the letters of recommendation need to be? Essentially, you should get letters of recommendation from your practicum supervisor. That's the top level. You want the next level to be any kind of classroom instruction where you're actually doing a theoretical orientation class. And then lastly, or as a last resort, you can get individuals from your master's program. Okay, Mirsad, more questions from that end?
Yes, for the psychology assistant position, the option 2, where is candidacy for the doctoral program, I actually did apply for that one since my master's is not in psychology. It's one of the ones that I'm not. They say we can't because you have to be 3 years in the doctoral program, but because this program is accepting masters from other institutions, we are not technically speaking 3 years. So I was very confused about that.
Sure. So the experience with what we've been working with, no student has been refused a letter of candidacy from our program manager, and you actually get that either from Mike Fitz or from Alfonso. His last name's escaping me. Treviso. So you would simply just email those two and ask for a letter for candidacy. You would actually qualify for the 3 years because you've already completed a master's degree. So you would actually just have to be known that you're a student of good standing. And if you've already reached the practicum aspect, that's why we're doing this now. You will qualify for that letter. There was a question that came up online that asked how many letters of recommendation should we need. I think a good rule of thumb is to get 4 in case one flakes out on you, because most sites are looking for 3. Another question.
My supervisor is a board certified psychiatrist.
Okay, so the question is, can you be supervised by a board certified psychiatrist? And this is why the supervision at a glance document is so vital. So there's little stipulations and there's little tricks of the trade that you need to keep in mind. So if you've got a board certified psychiatrist, they can supervise you for up to 750 hours in a psych assistant position only. If you're at an exempt setting, a board certified psychiatrist cannot supervise you for any hours. It has to be a licensed clinical psychologist. And if you take a look at the supervision at a glance document, which I can actually email out to individuals, it shows you all these yes, no's stipulations that might go there. But that's a good question about the requirements and the attention to detail that needs to be made. Any other questions on your end?
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I haven't started my dissertation. So according to what you said, the internship 1 and 2 and 3 should be in conjunction with the internship. So that means, and before that, I have to complete or having approval on proposal. So by the chair. So that means I cannot start anything about internship unless I have the proposal being approved by chair.
It sounds like you're getting a couple of terminologies mixed up there. So dissertation proposal needs to be completed in order to participate in KPIC. If you don't have your dissertation proposal approved, it sounds like or even started your dissertation, it sounds like you'll have to seek out the psych assistant route. That does not require dissertation approval. However, keep in mind, your dissertation needs to be completed in order to qualify for postdoc. And then the third aspect of that is that the internship classes are in conjunction with the internship itself. It has nothing to do with the dissertation. So once you start your internship, then you would register for the classes that you're taking.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions in the classroom or online or Rashad, your end?
No more questions here.
Okay. So moving forward, I just want to conclude with this. Like I said, this is actually being recorded, I hope. And I'm going to send this out along with the PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to ask the practicum instructors if they would put this also on their Canvas page so that students can access it. And I'm going to make it into a YouTube form so it's a little bit easier to watch. And really, I suggest you watch this more than once because there's a lot of information. And if you have any questions, you of course could reach out to myself or Dr. Wasley or your practicum instructor, and then we'll try to get you on the right path. But I do appreciate the time you've taken here today, and reach out if you need any questions.
Thank you.